Thanks, Jackie, and good afternoon, everybody. This is Maureen Conway. I'm Vice President at the Aspen Institute and Executive Director of our Economic Opportunities Program, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to today's Sharing Economy 2.0, a model from the UK for improving the gig economy for workers. And I'm joined here by...
Hi, everyone. This is Vicki Coitz. I'm the Associate Director here at the Economic Opportunities Program. This webinar is EOP's Working in America's ongoing discussion series that highlights an array of critical employment and job quality issues affecting low and moderate income Americans. We'd first like to thank our sponsors of this series, the Hitachi Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Cerdna Foundation for their support. Since 2013, this has addressed numerous issues facing working Americans, and in particular low and moderate income American workers, including the minimum wage, the challenge of child for working parents, public transportation, and other topics related to workers trying to make a living. If you're not familiar with the series, please visit us at as.pn/Working in America. That address is on the last slide of the PowerPoint presentation.
Thanks, Vicki. And this webinar is also part of a broader initiative at the Aspen Institute that we're calling Advancing Opportunity, and we're really trying to elevate the challenges around inequality and engaging a variety of policy programs across the Institute that deal with other issues, including health, education, and other aspects that affect inequality in America. So we hope that you'll really follow along with us at the Institute as we look at a broad array of issues that affect economic inequality and economic opportunity in America. Increasingly low and moderate income Americans face a number of challenges in making a living work, and there are significant concerns about unstable work, stagnant or declining wages, economically divided population. And so we really appreciate having you all join us for a variety of ways in which we have conversations about the nature of work and how to improve.
This particular webinar will build upon ideas that we shared in a previous Working in America event on the future of work in the sharing economy that was in early December. In that discussion, panelists looked at the benefits and the downsides of the sharing economy for workers who provide the services. Now, for millions of American consumers, these platforms have delivered convenience and improved accessibility to goods and services, as well as flexibility and income for workers. At the same time, the sharing economy poses numerous challenges for workers seeking to make a stable income with jobs in the sharing economy.
So now I get to introduce our speaker today, and I'm so delighted to introduce. He was on our December event. He's a speaker and really knowledgeable about all these issues. And in our December event, he discussed an alternative model developed in the UK for facilitating the exchange economy to improve how these markets work for workers. He's the director of Beyond Jobs, and the model that he straight from years of UK government and to create a better market for irregular blue-collar work. Wingham initiated and oversaw development of the sophisticated marketplace technology providers and supervised multiple pilots that tested the concept. He's authored 2 books, policy papers, and countless articles about the, quote, gray zone between a formal job and unemployment. This webinar, Wingham Rowan will provide background on the online platform that he has led the development of, give a tour of the site, and discuss potential application in the United States. There will be an opportunity for you all to ask questions as we go along.
Okay, great. I'm noticing a little bit of technical difficulty. If all of the speakers who are speakers could please mute their line when they're not speaking, that would be very helpful. And Jackie, do you have any other suggestions for some of the technical audio issues that we're having?
I think that's it. If Wingham has a mute on his, and if he could mute his line when
I do.
Okay, great.
Great. Great. Okay, well then we'll continue here. Before we turn it over to Wingham, we just wanted to remind you that you can submit questions on your computer through the chat box. We'll have 3 periods for question and answer, and so we'll be getting to those questions during those time periods. And we also would like to do a poll of the audience. We want to get a sense of your familiarity with the sharing economy platforms. Now, for some of you who may be unfamiliar with the term, the sharing economy is often referred to as the gig economy or the on-demand or peer-to-peer economy, and it refers to that dynamic collection of businesses that facilitate a wide variety of exchanges between people, including property, skills, labor. Some frequently cited examples are Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, TaskRabbit, and Instacart. So on your screen, you should have a poll. Please indicate if you have ever purchased goods or services through a sharing economy platform. So if you have rented property or space, for example, through Airbnb or Neighbor Goods, or shared a car with your neighbor through Relay Rides, click that one. Purchasing goods, things like Craigslist and eBay are examples of purchasing goods through the sharing economy. I think most people are familiar with the transportation services of Uber and Lyft. Accessing money is part of the sharing economy as well when you define it as broadly as possible. This includes crowdfunding platforms such as GoFundMe or Kickstarter. And then there's a variety of other services such as house cleaning, home repair, on-demand shopping services, etc., that fall into that last category. So it looks like you all are participating. Fantastic. And we've got a lot of people who have used transportation and purchased goods. Not as many people who have accessed money. And Jackie, can the folks in the audience see the results?
Yeah, once they submit their answers, they'll be able to see all the results.
Oh, well, there's an incentive. Okay, it looks like at this point about 47% of the folks in the audience have purchased goods through the sharing economy. The next highest is the transportation, so using sharing economy transportation services such as Uber and Lyft. That's at about 41% of you all. And then the next highest is about 35% have rented property or space on the sharing economy. And still consistently only about 13–14% have accessed money through the sharing economy through a Kickstarter campaign or whatever. Okay, interesting. Let's go to our second poll, which is about providing services or sold or selling of goods through the sharing economy. So please just indicate yes or no if you have provided any of these services. Okay. We'll wait for a few more responses to come in. The numbers are shifting around just a bit. Okay, well, it looks like we've stabilized a bit. It looks like about 60% of folks in the audience have not provided services or sold goods through a sharing economy platform, and about 40% have. So Wingham, that gives you a little bit of a sense of how much detail to go into when describing these types of platforms, including the one that you've worked on. So without further ado, I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to Wingham Rowan, who's going to tell us a little bit about his Beyond Jobs CETA new sharing economy platform. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Yeah, the background to this is a body of different research reports that were done for the British government some years ago, which looked at people who need really flexible work. I mean, really, really flexible. So there is a whole cohort in the labour market who wake up each morning and say, can I work today? I don't know. It depends if I get my job interview. It depends if I can find someone to look after my children. It depends how my recurring backache is, and so on. And if you're a lawyer or a consultant, it's relatively easy to find the work you need because you can work from a PC at home. If your skills are in shop work, catering and so on, it's much more difficult. And the research found there's about 22% of the entire population who need that form of work at some point each year. And then there was quantitative research say, well, would you like to do it? Would you be willing to work at different places where you constantly monitor for your reliability and so on? And the answer overwhelmingly was, these people want to work, so long as it will fit around them. And there is demand for this sort of work. It's spread throughout the economy. The sharing economy that we're all talking about today is part of it, but it ranges through. It's home beauty treatments, being hired to do market research interviews in the high street this afternoon, car cleaning, working in a distribution centre when they've got a big rush job on it, parking enforcement when there's an event in town. There's all sorts. And a lot of this activity is in the shadow economy. But add it all up, and this demand could equate to something like 5% of local GDP in any area. So the obvious conclusion is, I think we've skipped a slide. Sorry, Jackie, can you go back on? That's it. Yeah, so the obvious conclusion that was arrived at was you need much better markets for irregular work. And they've got to do a number of things. They've got to give the people doing the work huge control over their hours. And over things like how they're paid, because it's not good enough to just force these people to accept the lowest possible wage, because you will drive out reliability and quality. And pricing is actually quite sophisticated, so I might be very cheap or relatively cheap for a booking that's nearby, that starts in 24 hours time, that is 8 hours long, because I like doing those kind of bookings. But I might be much more expensive for a short notice booking the other side of town that's only 2 hours long. But I will do it as long as the money's right. So you've got to factor all that in. You've got to tempt this activity into the legitimate economy. And I was a journalist. I wrote books and, as Maureen mentioned, policy papers about all this. And there was a general emerging consensus, 2005, 2006, that yes, this sort of thing ought to happen. And our Office of the Deputy Prime Minister began funding the build of the technology required, which was going great until we came onto the radar of DWP, which is loosely Britain's Ministry of Labour. And they didn't like it. Their focus is absolutely creation of jobs. We don't do jobs. This is about odd hours of work that fit around other things in people's lives. Their technology, I think it's fair to say, well, it's definitely fair to say, was well behind the kind of technology you need for an advanced market. And to put that in context, the UK is, compared to the land of the free, a very centralised state. The OECD average, I think, is 55% of local revenues raised by local tax. In the UK, it's 18%. So all areas are very much beholden to central government. And the DWP opposition, unfortunately, sent a signal to local governments saying, you know, well, you don't really think this is a great thing to get involved in. Now, that opposition has recently been reversed, but DWP is, as is well known over here, struggling to overhaul its core systems for a radical new welfare regime. We still can't integrate with their technology. However, despite the DWP resistance, about 20-25 local governments did fund and explore how these markets might work in their area. Other parts of central government chipped in more money. But what we were seeing was a lot of small-scale pilots, very much seen as fringe. Let's get 100, maybe 200 people involved, and let's see and hope it grows from there. And unfortunately, these markets, like any shift to an advanced market in any part of the economy, do need some scale and some heft. But we learned a lot from those pilots, and I hope I'll be sharing that learning with you shortly.
Millions need odd hours of work today. There's demand for those hours. But the problem is the markets in which you buy and sell them aren't very good. And the British government set out to do something about that. So some background. There are thousands of websites for trading odd hours of gardening, care for older people,
we're watching the video.
Bar work,
dog walking.
Audio,
sorry.
Typically, they will revolve around the listings model. So the buyer writes an advert saying, this is what I'm looking for, and sellers respond. Many of the sites have fixed rates that the seller must charge. Some of them allow the buyer to specify they'll take the cheapest seller. Most of them want to know a rough idea of when you will be available to take bookings as a worker, and they usually ask you to specify the geography where you will do bookings. And we thought all this was just a bit haphazard because I might live on the borders of Glendale and Hollywood. I might be available this Tuesday morning. I don't know about next Tuesday morning. I might want to do all sorts of work but progress to better and better bookings as my reliability becomes clear. We set out to make markets for odd hours of regular work as efficient as markets for other sectors of the economy are in the 21st century. And that led us to the concept that we call CEDA, Central Database of Available Hours. And a CEDA can sit within anyone else's website. So recruitment agencies can access it, existing web marketplaces like the ones we've just flashed through, or public sector employment bodies. Crucially, when I go to say I want to work through a CEDA, it needs to know three things about me. What roles, what types of work will I do? And if I specify or accept anything that is sensitive, childcare for instance, it will make sure that the intermediary has vetted me and checked I have that certification. Second thing the CEDA needs to know is the terms on which you'll do bookings. So it needs a basic hourly rate and it won't allow you to set that below the minimum wage band for your particular age at the time of the booking. Then it needs to know, well, how far are you willing to travel from home? And would you travel further if you got more money on each booking to compensate you for the tickets you'll have to buy? What's your your minimum length of booking? Perhaps you'll only do a booking that's 8 hours long. Perhaps you'll do a booking that's less than an hour, but you need more money to make it worth your while for those bookings. What period of notice do you need? How much notice do you need before a booking starts? Some people need a day. You might be willing to just drop everything and do a booking, but only if you get more money for it. It's always up to you in a CEDA, and you can, of course, price by day of the week. So any hours that I'm available on a Sunday that are bought, I'll only work for an extra £1.50 an hour because I don't really want to work on Sundays, but I will if the money's right. Then the third thing, the final key detail that the CEDA needs to know about me before I can start working is when am I wanting to work, and that can be for today, for tomorrow, for weeks ahead, and I can have a regular pattern of hours. Oops, I'm accidentally clicking there, and I can change them by the week. So these are the hours I'm available this week. It's now 11 o'clock on Sunday, and I've just changed my mind. So I'm available for the rest of today until 7:30 tonight. I'm no longer available Tuesday morning. I've changed my mind about Monday. I'm only available for from 7:30 till 10 o'clock. So you can see that the CEDA is now storing the hours I want to work and all sorts of information about those hours, and it can be doing the same, of course, for hundreds of thousands of people locally. Because it's got that level of granularity about each hour, it can impose all sorts of legal controls, making sure that the bookings are completely compliant, and it can report out on patterns of supply, demand, pricing, and so on. And all this takes the market for the buyer very close to the kind of efficiencies and convenience that we take for granted elsewhere now. To understand how it works for the buyer, you need to watch the second part of this little demo video.
Okay, well that was a little video of Wingham showing us how the CEDA new kind of sharing economy platform works from the worker perspective. And we wanted to pause for just a moment to see if anyone has any clarifying questions about how that works. We've got 30 minutes at the end of the webinar to discuss questions about the sharing economy overall and how this pilot has been working in the UK. But if you've got any clarifying questions about the system, please type those in the chat box now, and we will moderate those and have Wingham answer them. At the moment, Wingham, we don't have any questions, so if you want to add any live comments to the video, please take a minute or so to do that. Wingham, we actually just got a question in. Who owns this database?
At the moment, it's vested completely in an independent social business in the UK. The plan is to turn that into a not-for-profit if funding can be found, and give the technology away to any city or area that has what is required to get these markets off the ground. and that requires a specific set of circumstances, as I'll explain in a moment.
Great. The questions are pouring in now. How does this system compare to staffing services, or what we call temporary here in the United States?
It's a very precise, very granular way of doing it. So typically your staffing service will ask, are you available Monday mornings, are you available Tuesday evenings, and so on. And this is about, well, I'm available between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock today, but I'm only willing to travel up to 2 miles from home. I'll go a bit further if I get more money. So it's much, much more granular. Of course, it can do the longer bookings. You know, if you want someone for 3 weeks, it will do that, and it'll price them up and check that they're available and so on. But it can underpin those. This isn't trying to drive all the existing platforms out of business. It sits behind them, and they can use it. It rebadges itself for whatever site you're looking at it through. It adopts the language of the site it's on, the branding, and so on. So it's a very granular, very precise way of doing that sort of thing.
Great. Could you tell us a little bit about the part of the system that helps people do their end-of-year taxes?
Well, we have it's configured for UK employment law, so it assumes what we call PAYE, pay as you earn, and that is built into the price of each transaction. And then there is a timesheet, which you'll see in a moment, that comes up at the end to ensure the transaction happened, that I did the work that you booked me for, and then that splits out all the payments into actually 22 different columns, and one of those is employee tax. We also have employer, what we call employer NI in the UK. It does that as well. So it's all coming out the back end, but it's invisible. You don't need to do it.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about the classification of an employee versus a contract worker. Are the people who sign up for this sharing economy platform, are they employees of anyone, or are they independent contractors?
Well, it can run both, but typically what we saw in the UK is agencies, intermediaries having a role. So in the UK, you don't want to employ someone directly because of insurance issues and all sorts, but you can hire someone who is employed for those 4 hours by an intermediary, by an agency that amortizes all that risk and is set up to absorb that risk. And that's the model that happens. And those agencies, those intermediaries would add whatever they wanted to the hourly rate based on either a flat per hour charge or a percentage markup on the worker pay rate, or some combination of the two.
And can the people who sign up, the workers who sign up for this platform, create an educational profile, or a profile that includes their experiences?
Absolutely. You'll see it in a moment. And it goes further than that. It also has what we call vettings. So it's if I want to do relief nursing, for instance, it will need to check that I have what we call the Royal College of Nursing clearance. It will need to check that I have what's called vetting barring authority clearance to work with children, and so on. And each of those is individually monitored and has to be assured to the system before it will allow me to have the role relief nurse attached to me.
And what has been the response from unions to this system? Does it
It's interesting. The TUC, the Trade Unions Congress, which is the British overall umbrella body, has actually promoted this. And I think it's fair to say that's because there's a far-sighted element there that realise fragmented work is essential for a section of the labour market. And either you're just going to consign those people to the margins of a very rigid labour market, or you are going to welcome them in. And it requires something of this sophistication to truly welcome them in on their own terms. So I would like to see a world where you can have your union, micro-union membership. So I say to the system as a worker, look, every booking I do, build in a 2.5% markup for my union dues, because I want the financial services of the union, I want protection from the union if something goes wrong. Now, no union has moved that far so far, but the system could handle it. and we are actively trying to engage them on that model. But of course, there's fears that this erodes jobs.
You are quite a visionary.
Hey, Wingham, we have one other question about wages, minimum wages, which I think you commented on. But I think this is an interesting idea. I think you did say that it has a setting so people can't bid themselves for below a minimum wage.
Absolutely.
Any other, and then somebody was asking about misclassification. I'm just wondering, are there any other sort of labor laws or that sort of thing that you have built into the system?
Yes. How long have you got? British labour law is tortuous. Our programmers regularly weep with their head in their hands over British labour law. Yes, we have all sorts of niceties. We have what's called working time restrictions. So you can't work more than 48 hours a week unless you've opted out of the European Working Time Directive. So it needs to understand that. If you're an international student, you can't do more than 12 hours a week, so you need to be able to apply that. There's a raft of these things. There's also, and you will have this in at state level in the US, there's banned hours for certain age groups. So in the UK, if you're under 18, you cannot be booked between 10 o'clock at night and 6 in the morning. So it has to impose that, and it has to impose that even on the weeks the clocks go back, the clock go forward. Yes, I could go on forever. There's all sorts of controls that has to sit behind all this if you are to deliver this objective of saying to the employer, this is what you want. Here's everybody who can do it, who's willing, available, compliant, skilled, everything. Just click for who you want, because you're only looking at people who can do it in every possible respect. And the legalities change all the time. We have 4 different minimum wage bands in the UK, for instance. And in its back office, it has to take all this in.
Great. I'm going to just do one quick last question, and then we'll play the second video, which looks at the CETA platform from the employer, from the buyer perspective. Wingham, could you just give us a quick example of the intermediaries that you said could access this? Is that like a temp agency or a current sharing economy company? Who is that?
All of the above. It could be a big recruitment agency. It could be a public sector employment agency. It could be a charity. Yes, of course, it could be an existing, I'd love to see someone like TaskRabbit use it in the way they use, for instance, the WorldPay module to do their credit card processing. And it funds itself through a small markup that's built into each transaction. And it's designed to sit within all these models. It's hugely modularized, hugely functional, and that was always part of the belief. If you're going to get this incredibly diverse array of activity into one place legitimately, you're going to have to handle all sorts of business models and incentivize all sorts of intermediaries who might work with the platform.
Great, thank you. So all the speakers, let's put ourselves on mute again, and Jackie, if you would play the second video.
For the sake of this transaction, I want you to imagine that your name is Alan Ashford. You're the parent of a disabled teen, Gary. Gary wants to go swimming at some point in the next day or so, and you need to find 2 workers to take him there. You're a customer of the WorldCare agency, which means they allow you to access the CETA through them. They have vetted you, and they have set you up with, in this instance, controlled budgets, because it may be that Gary is you're spending local government money on Gary's activities, and you have a range of roles that are specific to Gary, and today you want him to go swimming at the leisure centre, and you want to know how many workers who could do that are available over, well, actually it's going to give you the data for the next 10 weeks if you click through. But here you are, there is a number of workers who have signed a specific role that you created, which is specifying everything involved in taking Gary Ashford swimming, and you've approved the workers who accepted that role. Of course, they are vetted to do physical activities with disabled people. So it's now lunchtime on Sunday, but look, 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock today. Well, there'll be 4 of your workers available for those 2 hours. So let's go then and see. You need 2 of them. You could add a quarter of an hour to this booking, take a quarter of an hour off, but let's not bother. So it's found those 4 workers, and there's 29 others who could do it. Now you can click around this screen as much as you like, But everybody on this screen is available at those hours, is willing to do a booking with all those parameters at that location, and they are all vetted to do physical activities with a disabled person. The ones who are, these 29 have been added to the list just to show you the maximum choice available to you in the market. So they haven't signed your little roll, but they are licensed to do this activity. You can look for more information about these people. This is the sorry list of disasters that is my resume, and you can decide who you want. And the ones who have accepted your role are all a fixed rate because they have accepted your pay rate as part of their acceptance of the role. So let's take one of those. Let's take Paul Sedgwick, and you need a second worker. Why don't we take me? I'm more expensive, particularly because I charge an extra £1.50 on Sundays. But you're willing to take me. We're all available. We both want to do this booking. The total booking is going to cost you £48.28. You're happy with that. You then need to enter what we call reporting instructions, which is just where do people go, who do they ask for, and then you need to input your password again as a way of saying, yes, I understand I will be charged for this booking and I'm now making a definite commitment to book, and you are now getting a tracking page. And that noise was my phone going off because I'm one of the workers you booked. I told the system I want to find out about bookings using SMS, and this tells me everything I need to know about the booking. It tells me the hours, where to go. It tells me my pay rate will be £11.29, so that's less than your charge rate because, of course, the system's deducting tax and it's building in agency markup and its own charge. It tells me where to go to do the booking, and it's giving me until 12:13 to confirm, because this is a short notice booking, and it's telling me a yes code and a no code. So I am just texting back Y101, which means yes to my 101st booking on the system, and I will now get your reporting instructions. There they are, they've just arrived on my phone. So I have all the details I need to do that booking. Now I'm only getting that booking because it's within all my parameters at a time I want to work, and you are willing to pay my rate. And going back to you as the employer, we now can update this screen, and you can see that I've confirmed. Paul Sedgwick won't confirm. It's dummy data. He doesn't actually exist. And the system has created a timesheet for our booking, and it's populated it with the hours that you have booked me for. Extra hours can be added if you ask me to stay on, and I agree. Expenses can be added. This agency allows that. It also allows you to feed back on me, and you can approve the timesheet, and you can change my ranking if you think I do a particularly good job or so on. That ranking is specific to Gary. And of course, everybody could have been doing the transaction on their phone. We think this is potent technology. It does need certain conditions to get critical mass in any given area. They're explained at beyondjobs.com.
Okay, that was fantastic. Thanks again, Wingham. We've got a few more clarifying questions, and then Wingham will turn it over to you to go through the rest of your PowerPoint slides to tell us about some of the exciting visions for that you have for how this might work in the United States, at least on a pilot basis.
Sure.
So
okay.
One of the questions, just a couple of quick questions first, Wingham, if that's okay?
Yeah, of course.
How is the personal information of the workers protected?
Well, we have stringent data protection laws in the UK. You can only see that information if you are logged in, and you can only get a login if you are accepted as a buyer by one of the intermediaries, in other words, a reputable agency or website. And you can make that available public. You can make the information publicly available, but it's under your control.
Great. And can this system earn a profit? How would a profit be able to be earned on this system, which would make it more attractive to someone?
It can certainly reach sustainability if it's got enough volume going through it. It can build a small charge into each transaction. So you buy me for $20 for 2 hours, and it then adds payroll tax, it adds the agency charge, and the system can add its own charge, which might be 2.5%. And you don't need to know any of this as the employer. It just displays this is what your 2-hour booking is going to cost you, but that's how it can fund itself, and then that's claimed back through the buyer charge system and tallied at the end of each month.
And one more question.
But there is a question about, sorry, there is a question about whether you want it, whether making it profitable is it should or is a priority, because there's a very strong view at this end. You've got to take costs out of this corner of the labour market.
Thank you.
So the priority is making it sustainable rather than profitable, I'd say.
Great. Back, one last question again on those intermediaries. How can we ensure that they are reputable?
Well, this is, so the CEDA is just a machine, an incredibly sophisticated booking machine, and it doesn't force any one model on it. So if you, I know we have folk on this call from Austin and Chicago and Denver and Toronto and McHenry County. If you wanted this to work in Chicago, we would say, here's the machine. Now, what are your rules for operating it? So I bet that there is some sort of kite mark, some sort of standard in the US for employment businesses, and you might say any employment business that doesn't have that badge of approval isn't allowed to use the market in Chicago. It's entirely up to you. You know, this is the Chicago CEDA, which can be used by any other business that you set the rules for.
Fantastic. Jackie, if you could go ahead and pull up Wingham's last set of slides, we'll go through those, and then we'll have a little bit more time for some additional questions.
Yeah, well, what I wanted to do is just set the scene, because we started getting the government investment to build this, the CEDA platform in 2005, and irregular work was this sort of fringe, rather odd issue at the time. And now, I mean, this level of the data, this level of the labour market suffers from thin data. We don't really know what's going on because so much of it is ad hoc, so much of it is in the shadow economy. But if you look at the statistics around the rise in partial employment, so you will all be aware of the New York Times articles about the way many of the big caterers are now just pulling in their employees as and when they need them and sending them home when they don't. And these people are plunged into uncertainty and need odd hours of work that will fit around their primary employment. Automation is just looming over the blue-collar job market. That cute little fellow is called Baxter. He costs $25,000, even less, and you can quickly train him to do all sorts of tasks that at the moment you would need a human for. And any need for work that creates regular, predictable demand creates a job, and jobs and the very predictability of that makes it tempting and cost-effective to automate them. When you get into irregular work tasks, they're much harder to automate. So you can see a role for very high-quality, efficient, irregular work markets as a bulwark against the effects of automation. And on the demand side, you can see all sorts of growth as well. The sharing economy, to take just one example, is growing at 25% a year, according to Forbes. So the challenge really does seem to be, how do you get to advanced markets for irregular work? And technology isn't the issue. We've proved it can be done. It's all Q2 scalar. It runs on a big server farm in the north of England. That's not the issue. It's about this move to advanced markets. And you can see how it's happened in other parts of the economy. So travel is a very good example. In the 1990s, there was a wave of websites that had listings for travel. So you'd say, I want to go from New York to Fort Lauderdale, and it would say, here's all the airlines on the route and their phone numbers. Why don't you phone them or email them, see who's got the availability, and then decide who you want to go with. And now, of course, it's all moved to the kind of model exemplified by Expedia, when you say, I want to go to Fort Lauderdale for the weekend. It says, here's every available seat on the plane, here's every available room, here's every available hire car, all priced, all genuinely available. You just decide what you're willing to pay for, click, click, done. And the challenge here is to get irregular work to that kind of level of convenience and data and control. And that the switch is from the listings model. So here's a list of people who are looking for babysitters in London at some point this week, to the stored availability model. Here's 500,000 hours of availability of qualified babysitters this week in London. And here's a heat map of which parts of the city are underserved and oversupplied, and here's the utilization rate, how many of those hours have been booked, and so on. So advanced markets are always challenging to launch, but that's particularly true in irregular work. And I know that from hard experience, because this is the pattern of launch that I've seen so many times. So the red line is the number of workers registered on a local CEDA, and blue is the number of bookings. And typically what happens is you just get swamped. So let's say a local government puts a CEDA up on their website, and within a week, on the first week of launch, you can have 18,000 hours or so of residents inputting hour by hour the availability. And if you've only got 200-300 hours of bookings, very few people are going to get booked. And what happens is that 18,000 hours the following week becomes 12,000 hours, becomes 8,000 hours, becomes 4,000 hours. And the problem is that the supply in these markets moves very fast. So people need this work quite, well, in some cases desperately. They will register, they will take it seriously, they will have high hopes. Employers take time to change, they take time to unpick the way they do things now, or realize that how much they could benefit from this sort of work. And your problem is that in the time it takes employers to wake up to it, the supply has gone. And this kind of launch, where you've just got a very small number of bookings sustaining a very small number of sellers, means that buyers find it very hard to get their needs met because there are very few sellers left in the market. And this kind of launch is just unsustainable. So you do the modeling, and you will realize that to get a market healthily off the ground, critical mass in any area requires about $2.3 million worth of demand for irregular labor going through the market in its first 12 months. That gets its critical mass, where it becomes attractive to all sorts of employers, and it can just expand from there. But you need to keep a pool of several hundred sellers and growing, engaged, selling at least 3 hours a week to keep them in the market. A lot more demand than $2.3 is ideal, but that's about the minimum. It needs to be in one travel area, typically a city centre, and it can expand out of there. So the question then is, well, where does that demand come from? It won't come from corporates. They won't switch into a completely unproven channel. They've got their own scheduling tools, and they're big enough to enforce their clout at the moment. It won't come from small businesses and households. They badly need a market like this, but you can't aggregate their demand cost effectively for the first 12 months. The first wave of demand that gets a market off the ground is most likely to come from public sector bodies. So if you do want to get a market going in Austin or Chicago or Denver or McHenry County or Toronto, you need to round up demand for ad hoc workers across the public sector. So that table on the left is showing the kind of roles in a typical local government. They're often much better done by local people working on demand, but within their own parameters, within a large pool. There's then indirect demand. So let's say that the leaders of Chicago city government said, yes, we really want to do this. Well, who else might they get to put demand in? And there's a fairly obvious list. But the real sweet spot, the dream scenario, is that there's some new project starting. So let's say there was from somewhere $5 million made available to clean up Denver and remove graffiti and plant new shrubs and all that sort of thing. If you could channel that through the market, through a new market, maybe specifically to local young people, you would get an exponential effect. You would seed a much wider market that could come out of it. So that's what it's about. It's not about subsidizing the market, because the CEDA can be a very effective way to get all this work done, and it can report in extraordinary detail, and it can be a very impressive way of bringing more and more people into the work. But it's about finding that demand and unlocking it to go down into communities through this channel. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't say at this point that we are looking for cities to work with over over on your side of the Atlantic that might be interested in that. We're looking for anybody who might fund an operation around talking to the cities while workforce development plans are being drawn up before this time in 2016. And our promise is when you start looking, you will find lots and lots of people desperate for odd bits of work. You can't help them unless you find the demand. We'd like to work with you on that, but any city that can find this demand can have the technology.
Wingham, that was really terrific. One of the questions that keeps popping up has to do with, again, sort of some of the wage standards. And I think one of the issues is if you think about how people ask for work, right? So if I want somebody to come, say, clean my house or build a fence or something, I may guess how long it takes, but that amount of time it could take somebody is fairly variable. So how does this system sort of guarantee that minimum wage piece and be able to negotiate that between sort of somebody who puts a job in thinking that they're paying a fixed amount versus somebody who puts a willingness to work in based on hours worked? How does it deal with that?
Okay, I mean, this is a problem across the whole of the sharing economy. There are multiple stories of people being booked to pick up some shopping for an hour and actually discover the shopping is spread between 5 different shops all over the city, and there's no way you can do it in less than 2.5 hours. So this is a problem in any transaction of this nature. So the CEDA works on a different model. So when you hire me for 2 hours, you're not buying an outcome. You're not buying your shopping delivered. You are buying 2 hours of my time, and you know that what my reliability record is. So if I've done hundreds of these bookings for dozens of people and there's been no problems, my timesheets get signed time after time, the system and you can assume that I'm pretty reliable and I'm taking this seriously. And I'm not going to endanger that, because by staying reliable, I can command a higher rate. You will likely pay more for me. So it's a different proposition. You're buying my time. You're not buying a finite outcome, because nobody can guess what some of these tasks take. What the system allows is for bookings to be extended. So let's say you book me to come and, as you say, build a fence, and you book me for 4 hours and I'm only 75% of the way through. You ask me, well, will you stay on for another 90 minutes? I say yes. The system can take that in, recalculate the pay, the tax, and everything.
Great. So we've had a few questions come in also about employment benefits, and I know this may be a little bit difficult for you to comment on, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts about, I mean, in the U.S., health insurance, retirement, and those kinds of things are, frequently tied to somebody being an employee. So,
yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about what are the implications of this? Those kinds of
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Ultimately, if you believe that irregular work is going to become more and more important in labour markets, you have to accept that this sort of benefit will go micro. In other words, the system can be told charge an extra 7.5% on all my bookings because that is going into a health insurance fund. Now, my understanding is it's not that micro at the moment. What you can do as an alternative route is use a CEDA to create new financial services for irregular workers. So, for instance, if I am active as a babysitter, carpet cleaner, a member of street patrol, I do a bit of home care, I do some building site tasks, and I do leafleting promotion work, the CEDA knows patterns of supply and demand in those markets. It knows how reliable I am. It knows what patterns of availability I have. It can create 2 important data sets. One is how much demand is there going to be for my services going forward based on historic patterns. 2, how likely am I to capture that demand based on my reliability, my pricing, my patterns of availability. And out of that, you can easily create a tailored financial package. So it might be that I'm a completely reliable CEDA worker across multiple roles, and competing financial advisors are offering me sick pay, holiday pay, I was going to say maternity pay, but you get the idea. And they're doing that because they have all the data they need to make a reasonable projection of my future earnings potential. So ultimately, that's what you want to do, but you need really deep markets for that to become viable. It just depends how far you think labour market's going to go towards this sort of fragmentation.
Thanks. So I think, sort of speaking of this, I guess there have been a couple questions on sort of how far do we want the labor market to go towards this sort of fragmentation. There was one question about, do these, as these markets become more user-friendly and robust, does this encourage more employers to organize employment in this way? And, sort of, is that a good thing? And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yes, I do. And I'm sorry, I'm completely partisan on this. I have spent years talking to people who desperately, almost pathetically, need odd bits of work. If you are looking after two parents with Alzheimer's and you never know when they're going to be well enough to go to the day centre, some days one is and the other isn't, and so on, you can just become locked into the house. You can lose your social circle, you can lose your self-respect, you can lose all the things that those of us who go out to work take for granted. And I passionately believe that getting those people the work they need should be a priority, not just for humane reasons, but solid economic reasons. These people are often extremely well organised, very talented, a lot to give, and frankly, too much of the labour market just discards them, just marginalises them. It's the same for people with complex childcare needs. If you've got a disabled child, if you never know when your mental health condition is going to return, we can't just chuck these people away. And a job isn't what it used to be. There are going to be people who have a job, but the reality is they need more work on top of it that fits around the job. So I'm afraid I've just talked to people with harrowing stories of years and years of just being completely marginalized. Now, will platforms like this kill off jobs? Well, where there is a need for regular work, an employee is better value in the long term, because remember, the hourly rate of these people is more expensive than an equivalent employee because you are paying intermediary markups and so on, and because they're going to have to travel and so on. But the temporary workers don't have the organizational knowledge, the networks, all that sort of thing. So if your need for work is reasonably regular and predictable, you will still need employees. It's that layer on top, that fuzzy bit where you can muddle by. You run a cafe and it's 11 o'clock in the morning. You're going to be busy for 90 minutes at lunchtime. You can muddle by. You'll lose a few customers. Your customers have to wait. Your tables be dirty. But you can muddle through because you've only got 3 employees. But if you could get 3 extra employees for 90 minutes and know they were completely reliable, completely, had a food hygiene certificate, they've been inducted in how your cafe works, you might just do it. And you've got to unlock that demand. I think it's just cruel not to. So I'm sorry, I'm not sitting on the fence on this one.
So I have another question about sort of incentives on the flip side. What's the incentive, particularly if you're saying, okay, well, let's, build in sort of an additional payment so that for people to pay into their health insurance or what have you, or there's employment taxes and so on. What's the incentive for people to sort of use this intermediary market to kind of find somebody that meets their needs, but then take their business offline? So, how does that influence sort of public finances and those kinds of things?
Off-platform transactions, it's a huge problem for all these platforms. eBay has struggled with it for years. You cannot completely prevent it. You never will. But you will always have the draw of untaxed transactions to compete with. What you've got to do is make these markets so efficient, so minimal in the time it takes to make a booking, so convenient, and offering so much progression and so on, that people want to stay in the legitimate market. And it's one reason you want to drive costs and overheads out of these markets, is you are constantly competing with cash-in-hand transactions. So let's say I am a worker across multiple types of roles. Now, you want to book me to do maybe on a fairly regular basis a bit of gardening for you, you're going to have to phone me every time. And after a while, that might become a bit irritating because you could just have 3 or 4 people who you're quite happy doing your garden, and you can just see when are they available. Oh, click done on my phone. It's taking me seconds. I might want to stay in the market for all sorts of reasons. There might be solid reasons why I don't want to go into the untaxed economy, and I might want to build this track record for reliability because I realise that makes me attractive. So, for instance, when the local supermarket says, well, we need extra cashiers, CEDA, show us people who have regular patterns of availability in the evenings when we tend to need top-up staff, and who have done X number of bookings for Y number of buyers with a customer service element. And we'll pull them in for 4 hours of paid training. From that point on, we will have them as a pool from which we can book top-up staff as well we need them. I might want all that opportunity. And frankly, losing, if I'm a low-income American, I'm not paying much tax anyway. So that.
Wingham, we've got a couple more questions. Yeah. So you want to wrap up real quick and we'll move to those?
Well, that's it really. You've just got to make the market so attractive, so lean, so efficient that people want to stay in it. But you will never conclusively win the battle against the shadow economy.
Great. Jackie, could you advance it to the very last slide? We want to make sure people know how to get a hold of Wingham and cruise the Beyond Jobs website, and also you can learn more about working in America there. Wingham, I've got, and also we want to let people know that we have recorded all of the questions. We'll send those to Wingham, and he'll be able to provide any answers to questions that were not answered in today's webinar. So the 2 last questions are, could this site be used to organize the providers to improve their wages and benefits? And then the final one, which is kind of looking into the future, what are the possibilities in the United States? And who should be looking at this? Who should be studying this? Who might want to invest in this? And we've got 2 minutes.
Okay. Could it help the promoters get organized? It can do whatever you want. If you're going to have it in Denver, you want it to be the most efficient way to book this kind of labor in Denver. It's up to you what the balance is between empowering the workers and the most efficient possible market. That's a political judgment. It's just a machine. It follows the rules that the people who if you like, sit behind it want. And then who talk to in the US? Well, I can't emphasize enough, we are very keen to talk to cities that are thinking through their workforce development plans and are willing to put some thought and a bit of resource into looking around to see if they have the demand to get these markets off the ground. And we are very keen to talk to anyone who might fund that sort of effort, who does believe that irregular work has a place in the labour market. And we hope that's explained as you said, beyondjobs.com, beyondjobs.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We'd like to thank Wingham for his time today, as well as for doing the 2 videos for us. As we noted at the beginning of the webinar, this will be recorded and it will be posted on the Working in America website in a few days. And we will also send these questions over to Wingham, and if your question was not answered, then he may be getting back to you. So I'll turn it back over to Maureen Conway for final thoughts.
Well, I think we're at time, so I don't want to say too much other than to really, again, thank Wingham a lot for all his insights and sharing his time this afternoon when it's in the evening and where he is. And I hope that you all will continue to stay in touch with us in our Working in America series and other events here that relate on these critical issues around work and work in America that we're really trying to figure out at this time. So thank you, Wingham, so much, and thanks everybody for sticking with us.